Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about cultural vandalism. Now, if I'm talking a little bit off the cuff here in this video, please forgive me if I ramble or whatever, but this is a broad concept. There's a lot that actually is behind this idea of cultural vandalism. I feel like there's a lot of ground to cover, and I want to try to do it in as little time as possible. This is a term that I've seen a lot of you use before, talking about, say, Hollywood products or revisions of classic works. A lot of things could fall under this umbrella of cultural vandalism, but I'm going to focus mainly on adaptations and sequels and the changing of hands of various kinds of intellectual property that allows for interests that are different from creators to alter and change the public's perception of what a work actually is. So one of the things, just as some background, that I would give as an example, not of cultural vandalism, but of how this can happen, how the means by which we can actually vandalize our cultural artifacts more than just drawing mustaches on the Sphinx or something like that. I mean, changing public's perception of what a cultural product actually is. If you've seen Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson are generally well-loved movies. I think they're visually great. I love the visual design. I think they're well-made movies. Are they great adaptations of the Lord of the Rings? I would say at the time, we definitely thought it was the best that we could get. I was really surprised that they were as good as what they were. I had very low confidence that Hollywood was going to be able to adapt Lord of the Rings, and they did a much better job of it than I thought they would have. But does that mean it's a good adaptation? Well, it's missing the ending, which is pretty critical. It's missing some really important elements throughout the entire book, and the characters are quite different from how they are in the book. So when people think of Aragorn, and this is a problem, right? When I talk to someone about Lord of the Rings, they inevitably start to default to whatever the movies had. Whatever was done in the movies, that tends to be their default for how it is. And even multiple readings of the books, they're like, oh, wait, I forgot the book was different, because the movie ends up kind of creating the initial impression, image, and memory of what that story is. This is the nature of movies and of visual media, is that because they affect multiple senses, they can create really strong memories. But movie Aragorn is quite a different character from the book Aragorn. The book Aragorn is ready to be king. He is confident. He is going off to war. The movie Aragorn has this reluctance to what he's doing. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to be anything. And Peter Jackson might have added this in to create like an extra layer of story tension and to kind of work with the romance that he wanted to put on screen, which in the books is really relegated to the appendices. And even then, the romance is really added. It's really not in the regular story that we read in the books. But that perception of Aragorn, the way he looks, the way he talks, the way he acts, is people's basic memory of how Aragorn is or should be, even if they've read the books. But when you read the books, you really come across a much more confident and, in some cases, harsh person. The way that he talks to Butterbur, talks about Butterbur, Strider I am to one fat innkeeper, right? He tells him that he would forget his name if he wasn't being yelled at it all days, right? He can be harsh to people if he needs to be. There's a lot of layers to his character that you just don't see on the screen version. And this is true of all the characters of Legolas and Gimli. Gimli becomes somewhat of a comic relief character. And it's not that he has no comedic elements in the book, but he gets turned into a comic relief kind of sidekick, like Legolas and Gimli doing this little comedy duo team, that we think that that's who Gimli really was and who he was in the books. So our impressions of the movies become the default state for how we approach an important cultural work like Lord of the Rings. So that if I have a conversation with a normal person, almost always they're going to be talking about what they remember from the movies, while I want to talk about what is in the books and what Tolkien did as an artist himself. And these are very different things. So, is this an example of cultural vandalism? I don't think those movies are. I just think they're not ideal adaptations. However, that's the avenue by which we actually can vandalize cultural products. So we have a movie that's coming up by Christopher Nolan, who people really like him as a director, and I think he's done some good movies. That is the Odyssey. And they have cast a Black Helen of Troy. They have a rapper being a bard, a black rapper being a bard. They have Zendaya as Athena. This is a significant departure from what would be a faithful cultural product. And I talked about this in the other video. It's not about historical accuracy. It's really about mythological accuracy. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why the Odyssey is going to be really a stinker. Like, my anticipation is that it's going to be a really not good movie, a really bad movie, but it's going to be an example of what we are talking about here with cultural vandalism. That is to say, by making a big blockbuster movie that is an adaptation of the Odyssey, most people don't read the Odyssey. Most people don't read Homer. They don't read the Iliad or the Odyssey. They don't read Ovid. They don't read any of the classics. They're not reading Virgil. They're not reading that stuff. Okay, in translation, or certainly not in the original, like ancient Greek. They're not doing that. So their impression of what the Odyssey is will be what is on screen and what's presented to them. That's going to be their baseline. If they've never encountered that story before, if they've never seen an adaptation of it before, except maybe in reference, like with "Where, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" or something like that, then that becomes their baseline for what the Odyssey is about. And this gives all kinds of avenues, not just to really the race switching is like the brown M&M test. It's letting you know exactly what Nolan is actually planning to do with the film, which is to subvert, destroy, and vandalize the original ancient work. Why would you want to do that? Well, because it's a foundational work for the West. It is one of the foundational myths of the entire European continent. You will find many cultures, including the Irish. There's Irish myths that have people coming from Troy to found Ireland. There's Roman myths that have Aeneas coming and escaping from Troy, taking a little detour in North Africa and Carthage, and thus explaining sort of in a mythological way, explaining the competition between Rome and Carthage, and then going to Rome, and sort of this double founding of Rome, Romulus, Remus, but also Aeneas. Mythologies can be a little bit hairy because of a lot of reasons. But the point is that the Trojan War, which is really more the Iliad, but we have some of it in the Odyssey too, is such a profound founding moment for the mentality and the history of the West, the mythological understanding of Europe as a self, that to not treat that with respect would be the equivalent of making a Bible story. I mentioned Black Moses, but think of something even worse, that sort of like Egypt, gods and kings, right? You're going to do something that's an attempt to completely subvert the meaning, where instead of God saving the Israelites, he's like really evil and wanting to kill the Egyptians, right? Completely changes the focus of the story and things like that. That's what I expect this version of the Odyssey to do, is to completely do the opposite of what the original poem was really laying out. And I think part of this will be done maliciously, like what I said, because it's this foundational piece of European identity. It has to be attacked. It can't be allowed to simply be a cultural product for the West. It has to be subverted, destroyed. And the way that you're going to destroy it, it's sort of like newspeak and doublethink. You're going to destroy it in the minds of the people who are watching the movie, because they haven't read it. So everybody's idea of what the Odyssey is going to become this movie. That's the intent. That's the malicious intent. Now, I think there's often more at play here than just malice. There's that old saying, like, never ascribe to malice that which can be like properly explained as stupidity. But you can have both. In my experience, it's like if there's malice, there's almost always stupidity going along with it. So the other part of this is that the modern mind can't really comprehend mythology, especially the modern Hollywood mind, because they're secularized. Their religion is like the woke religion. It's the death cult of Hollywood and the pop cult. So they don't really get religion. That means that there's several, you're several iterations separated from the pagans. Like, Christians can understand pagans better than, the woke atheists can. And, maybe Catholics and Orthodox can understand pagans even more because they're a little bit closer traditionally to it, in terms of like descent and things like that. So, whatever way you want to think of it, they're really far away from mythology. They can't understand the mythological importance. They can't understand the symbolism that may exist in the text. They have no symbolic interpretation of anything that might be going on in the Odyssey or the Iliad. Whereas I look back at my education in classics as like an undergraduate, and even though I was pretty snot-nosed and didn't pick up nearly as much as I probably should have, I got a lot of stuff from my teachers that helped me to understand the symbolic layers that exist in these ancient works, whether it's Virgil or it's Homer or anything else, or it's one of the Greek dramas. Those symbolic layers, what they communicate about the ancients' view of themselves and the gods, their place, the idea that it's better to be a man than to be a god, the way these things are portrayed, those attitudes, they're there, and the modern mind is probably going to miss those. And the modern mind we're in a kind of a post-literate society. They're just going to watch the movie and they're going to think that's what the Odyssey is. And so it's going to be bad. So part of it is malice. I think part of it is also stupidity. You're having people who can't really understand mythology attempting to do a significant mythological story. And one of the ways that I know that people really miss and just don't understand mythology is they talk about superheroes being mythological, and it's just not, except in the most distant way. Like if you have no idea how to understand mythology, you can kind of start with Superman and work your way there, but there's not really a parallel. Like Kevin Smith going off and being like, these stories are like the Bible stories. It's like, they're not, Kevin. They're really not. Okay, Superman is nothing like the Aeneid, right? Superman is nothing like the Bible. Whether you're talking about Old Testament or New Testament especially, but like if you're just looking at stories of the Old Testament, no, they're nothing alike. There's no symbolic layer, or the symbolic layer is very thin and superficial because it'll be referencing other foundational works if it's done well, like the Odyssey. So I think that's part of it. There'll be malice and there'll be stupidity in equal measure, and that's not going to create a good product. But it will vandalize. It will vandalize something that's quite foundational, I think, for the West. There's other examples too. People are going to talk about Star Wars, so you might be in the comments, thinking about The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi I called a hate letter to fans. That was a deliberate and malicious attempt, I believe, to destroy the Star Wars franchise. Why? Because the director did not like it. The director thought it was cheesy. The director thought it was lame. The director didn't like that people liked it. The director didn't like that it was as influential as it was. So he had the opportunity, handed the keys to tear it down. Now, the proper mental alignment for anyone who likes Star Wars is to understand that basically The Last Jedi doesn't count. And the reason it doesn't count is that George Lucas didn't create it. George Lucas is the Pope of Star Wars, if you want to think about it that way. So once you've extricated the Pope, there's no authority to decide what is and isn't canon, right? You've removed his authority. He's the one who created Star Wars. So if he didn't create Last Jedi or sign off on it or write the story, then it doesn't really count. But in people's minds, it does count because they saw it. They watched the movie and they're like, Luke dies. I guess Luke's dead. Luke turned into such a bad person. Luke never existed. Luke is completely fictional. But if you're going to create a canon of Star Wars, Why does that one get to enter in? Oh, because Disney paid a bunch of money to George Lucas to buy it from him so that they have the legal right to make those movies. Okay, that's a way of thinking of it. Or you can just not care. You can not care what they did. But the fact is, that is an example of cultural vandalism. And there's probably many other examples. The deeper topic here is, why does Hollywood never adapt a story? There's a lot of reasons. In this case, part of it is malice. But more often, it's a combination of incompetence plus just lack of confidence in the source material. Plus, directors, producers, they want to put their mark on it. They want to make their movie, and they're just looking at, for example, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep as a starting point for the movie that they want to make. And that's what they do. And so if they discard a bunch of things from the book or whatever, then it works out that way. And sometimes it can be really bad, like with the Wheel of Time series. It can end up being really atrocious because of things you want to insert, because you want to make a show that's like this, rather than adapting the book that you paid for. And that's a whole different topic. When it's done with malice, the point is to, like in this case, just create the impression in people's minds that this is what the thing looks like. Already in online discussions, people are hearkening back to that movie from like 20 years ago, Troy, with Brad Pitt in it. Troy is not an accurate portrayal of the Iliad, right? And it's not really mythologically accurate. It may not be historically accurate. Obviously, that Bronze Age armor before the Bronze Age collapse is going to look different than what we see on screen. It's more of an idealized version of maybe, the hoplite kind of armor that we associate with later Iron Age Greece. But it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not mythologically accurate. It's missing a lot of the layers, and certainly is not symbolically informed. It's just not a very deep. It's not a very deep adaptation of the Iliad. But people are looking back at it as like, well, that's what you should have done. It's like, oh, we're pretty far removed here. That one's not cultural vandalism. It's just not a great adaptation. But we're looking at that one fondly because it's not absolutely malicious dog shit, which is what you're going to get with Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. It's an absolute fuck you to everybody, everybody on Earth. I feel like it's a huge. It's going to be a huge malicious problem. He's picking a translation that he's working from. I'm trying to remember who did it, but it made some waves a while ago because of how bad it was, that it was like modernized and tried to take the misogyny out or things like that. And maybe the ancient Greeks were misogynistic, and you should just show that, right? But it's going to be bad, right? And if I'm using harsh language, keep in mind the words that they have are going to be quite vulgar, and what they're doing is quite vulgar too. So anyway, that's most of what I have to say about that. The Hollywood apparatus uses movies because they are so stimulating, and because people don't read, they watch movies with the knowledge that when people watch it, any real impression of the reality of a piece of literature gets stripped away. They think of the movie, they don't think of the literature. Even when it's not something malicious, when it's something like Lord of the Rings, it's really hard to have a conversation with Lord of the Rings because people are thinking of the movies and they're not thinking of the books, and they don't remember the things from the books. Or it's Jurassic Park, the things that they changed in Jurassic Park. Why did they change those? Well, I don't think it was necessarily out of malice, but when they adapt a movie, they're like, well, I wish this guy would have died, and so I get to kill him. It makes it hard to have a lot of discussions that you'd like to about the themes from the book because people just default to whatever's there in the movie. And this is quite apart from the aesthetics, right? Powerful visuals can affect us and then make us more interested than we otherwise might be, make us more pliant to like reception of messages and things like that. Movies are very potent. They're very potent media. They are the new media of the post World War II world. And they can be used for good or they can be used for ill. And I think what we're in now is in a period of using them for ill, possibly. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below. I'd love to read them. Thanks for listening to me ramble on this rather complex topic. And I will see you all next time. Have a great, great day.